It is Monday, June the 2nd, 2025. Welcome back to Hang Up and Listen, the sports podcast here at Slate. Back with you yet again this week. I am Alex Kirshner, a contributing writer for Slate and co-host of college football podcast Split Zone Duo. This week, I hope you like finals. The Stanley Cup final begins Wednesday in Edmonton. It's a rematch of last year's matchup between the Oilers and the Panthers. The NBA finals start Thursday in Oklahoma City, Pacers against Warriors. Also, congrats to all of our college and high school students who are probably taking their own finals right about now, or have taken them in the last few weeks. It's a very final time of year, and we love that. We'll talk about those series in our special hang-up kind of way. We do know exactly who will win and in how many games, but we'll withhold that information and talk you through some other angles that we find interesting about the NBA and NHL's last series of the year. Then we'll have an informative interview with Ken Belson, a sports business reporter for the New York Times, about a little tax code issue that is threatening to become a big pain for owners across professional sports, but might be targeted, maybe in particular, at the NFL. As usual, joining me this week is Lindsay Gibbs, the publisher of Power Plays, a newsletter that covers the key stories of the moment in women's sports. Lindsay, how are you?
I am doing so good. This is one of my favorite sports times of the year. Finals, French Open, WNBA season heating up, lots of women's soccer, U.S. Open, women's, golf. I'm just a happy girl.
Yes.
Happy girl.
Yeah, good tournament over the weekend at one of my favorite golf courses, Erin Hills in Wisconsin. It wasn't ultimately very dramatic in the end, but it was fun.
Do not hit a putt too hard on that course. The ball will never stop rolling.
No, this is what golf should be when it's the U.S. Open.
Yeah.
There should be blood. It should be ugly for the best in the world. And of course, joining us this week as well is Ben Lindbergh. Ben is a senior editor for The Ringer, and he co-hosts Effectively Wild, a baseball podcast. Ben, how are you?
Doing well, and I bring you a dispatch from the podcast Sports Pope Department. 3 quick updates for you on the Pope's sports fandom, which was the subject of an Afterball a couple episodes ago. First, the June 14th event at Rate Field in Chicago, dubbed Chicago Celebrates Pope Leo XIV, sold out almost instantly and caused something of a frenzy on the secondary market, even though the Pope will not be in attendance. He will, however, record a special video message that will premiere at the ballpark. Bishop Lawrence Sullivan, Vicar General of the Archdiocese of Chicago, said, "The fact that he's a baseball fan means that he really understands Chicago and makes him so much more relatable. So bad news for anyone who was hoping to pick up some cheap tickets to Chicago Celebrates Pope Leo XIV. Second, on Sunday, Leo blessed 159 cyclists as they started the final stage of the 3-week race, the Giro d'Italia. They got off their bikes, shook hands with the Pope, and presented him with a replica of the leader's pink jersey, as for the first time ever, the race took them inside the walls of the Vatican. Finally, and maybe most intriguingly, the mystery of the Pope's soccer loyalties has deepened, because Leo has been rumored to be a Roma fan, but last week he held a private audience with recent champions Napoli, who are Roma's rival, and when he entered the room, there was a hesitation. The players didn't clap immediately, which led Leo to say maybe they didn't want to applaud because in the media they say I'm a Romanista. That's what the press says. Not everything that you read in the press is true. Or here on podcasts, apparently. So the Pope is playing coy, which will only make us more curious about where his loyalties lie.
I feel like he's really enjoying this.
I think so, too. He's milking this.
Yeah. I mean, it's starting to seem like he's making it all about him.
A little bit.
We applaud a sports pope, though. It's probably been long enough before we've had a pope who would be willing to record a video message for a Chicago White Sox game.
Yes.
So it makes me feel more confident in the future of Catholicism. Before we get into the rest of our business, as always, we want to thank our Slate Plus members for making our show possible. You help us make the show, you get the show ad-free, and you also get bonus segments. And there is great news, which is that we have one of those live for Slate Plus members right now. It is about the act of fouling up 3 after a shambolic final minute of Game 4 of the Western Conference Finals last week. Got a lot of people talking about that very subject again and louder than ever before. You can hear it right now as long as you're a Slate Plus member. Subscribe by going to Apple Podcasts and clicking try free at the top of our show page, or visit slate.com/hangupplus to get access wherever you listen. Our friends in the NBA National Press Corps are in crisis. The finals start Thursday, and there are, get this, no direct flights between Indianapolis and Oklahoma City, at least not as of my last check shortly before recording on Monday morning. The Thunder pretty much destroyed the Timberwolves to win the West, and the Pacers were the clear better team in the series against the Knicks. Now they're both here. Two finals participants that have taken, I think, unusual paths to this point. Neither is a major market destination for top-tier free agents, and neither has been bad enough at the right times to stock up on can't-miss superstars who would rocket them to the top. The Thunder did take Chet Holmgren second overall a few years ago, and he's been very good, sure. But Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, the MVP, was a trade pickup. So was Tyrese Halliburton for the Pacers. And there are stories like this up and down these rosters. Lindsay, which of these team builds do you find to be the most compelling story worthy of mentioning first on this episode of Hang Up and Listen?
For me, it's the Pacers. Even though I think Oklahoma City's gotten a lot of attention for their team build over the years. When you have kind of a throw-in to a trade, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander becoming the MVP of the league, you're going to have a lot of people getting a lot of credit for that. Even though I guarantee you, even the Thunder did not see that as the future possibility when they made that trade. And while I do think the Thunder are worthy of a lot of praise, I mean, their selections in the draft have just been phenomenal. And it's clear that they know how to develop players and have found a team chemistry that's really successful. I just think what the Pacers have done in, of course, trading for Halliburton and giving him the space and the keys to develop into the superstar that he has today. But really that quiet trade for Pascal Siakam last year that just kind of got lost in the shuffle. I think a lot of people thought maybe that he wasn't big enough of a name for the Pacers to be the second best player on a conference finals or NBA finals team. But the truth is, I think what Indiana did by going after Siakam, of course, I think the Raptors waited a little bit too long to trade him. So, you can blame, I think, the Raptors a little bit for this. But they thought he's good enough. Like, we're not going to sit on our hands and wait till the absolute perfect piece falls into our lap. We're going to take this step because it makes us better now, because he's a good complement to our superstar, and because he helps push us forward. And I think way too often you have teams get overly precious with these trade decisions, looking for the absolute perfect move instead of just making a good move. And that's what I really like about this, is maybe unsexy as that sounds. I mean, Siakam has been remarkable, and he was always a remarkable player. I'm not saying he's a perfect player.
Yeah, the Pacers defensively, when Pascal Siakam is on the court, are roughly 9 points better per 100 possessions, which is the difference, if you extrapolated it, which you can't really do one for one, between being one of the great defensive teams in basketball and one of the terrible defensive teams in basketball. And I don't know that it's all up to Pascal Siakam, but the evidence does start to mount. If you remember back, the contributions he made to that 2019 Raptors finals team, and he's doing it again here. This might just be a championship player.
He might be good. I don't know. But it's not just Siakam, of course. I mean, you look at Miles Turner, who is this, I love when teams have a long standing player, in their starting five, who is getting to kind of experience the spoils of success after being there for some really rough years. So Miles Turner at center. And then you've got, the Nesmith and Nembhard, who, are two kind of scrap heap players almost. Nembhard being a second round pick by the Pacers, Nesmith being kind of, he was on the G League for the Celtics, for a while. And now they've just fit perfectly. I love it.
Well, I will praise OKC. Won't someone finally speak up for the Thunder being a great basketball team? I know, very bold of me, courageous
Sam
take here.
Presti, doesn't get much hype.
No, not until now. Yeah, they made the most of a bunch of trades involving superstars years ago that sort of laid the groundwork for this roster. The Paul George trade, the Russell Westbrook trade, the Chris Paul trade. and then really great drafting. And they have developed this powerhouse that really, I mean, the Cavs and Celtics lost. This was supposed to be all about the top-heavy postseason, and the Cavs and Celtics are out. The Thunder have mostly made it look easy, despite Denver taking them to a Game 7. But they are so young and so deep. And that's why I think everyone's already looking beyond the series, which is not to say that this is just a predetermined outcome and we can write off the Pacers here. I think this is going to be a fun and exciting series. And the Pacers have been a really fun story this postseason. But with the Thunder, their sights should be set on multiple titles. I mean, I know they need to win one first, but they were the third youngest team this year. They're the youngest team to appear in a finals since the Trailblazers in 1977. I mean, Shea is the old seasoned veteran at age 26, and the supporting cast, which is super strong around him, is even younger than that. So they combine just dominance in the moment with a young franchise cornerstone star and then an even younger and deeper supporting cast. And so I've seen people joke about how the second apron is going to do a number on the Thunder. I mean, maybe eventually, but not for years. They're the rare team that is almost immune to salary cap concerns just because they're so young and you have, various options with franchise players to try to get around that. But that's not even a concern currently for them. The future is so bright in addition to being heavily favored in the short term.
To that point, I think there are some obvious parallels between this group of Thunder players. Thunders, is it? I don't know. We've got to do something about these sports team names that don't end in a plural S. But, this group of Thunders and the guys who played for this team when they were last really up before that core fell apart. Now, it started to fall apart more than a decade ago now, or almost exactly a decade ago. When there was Kevin Durant and James Harden and Russell Westbrook and Serge Ibaka, and Presti ultimately did not keep that team together. And maybe he couldn't have done it forever, but they did trade Harden, who then went on to be, James Harden, which is both a compliment and an insult. I guess I don't really know, Lindsay. Do you think that the Thunder might feel a little bit more of like the preciousness of this moment because they should be aware at this point that just having this incredibly optimistic roster outlook for a long time does not necessarily mean that things are ever actually going to work out?
Yeah, there are no guarantees. Of course, the Harden trade was one made in fear, right? That was a scared move and a too soon move, and I hate those. And I think history has shown a bad move. I mean, first of all, what a feat to have a small market team, if we're going to, go with the narratives, right back at the top of the league so quickly with a completely different roster built completely different ways. Like, that's taken so much talent. But I think from the fans and from an organizational perspective, absolutely, you want to make the most of this right now while you got it. I mean, to have a draft pick like Jalen Williams hit in the way that it did, I guess you could probably say both Jalen Williams, but it's particularly the starting Jalen Williams. And then, to have the Caruso edition has just been so perfect. The Hardenstein edition has been so perfect, but you're not guaranteed health. You're not guaranteed, these players to stay on this trajectory. And I think the most exciting thing for the Thunder right now is got to be the landscape of the league. There is not a LeBron domination team or a Warriors super team right now that is standing in the way of anyone who makes it far in the playoffs. There is what feels like a myriad of pathways to the top. And we've seen that where this will be a new champion for the 7th straight season. I think a lot of people are predicting that the Thunder can be the one to break that pattern, to actually create maybe what is the next dynasty. Because as we've mentioned, they are in a decent cap situation for a team of its ilk, but not too fast, because people thought the same thing about Denver a few years ago. Nobody thought the Milwaukee Bucks would be a one and done. I think there was a lot of thought that they would get back to them. And of course, the Celtics, it seemed like a given they were going to win 3 of the next 4 almost. And then, of course, the Tatum injury and life happened. So there is nothing guaranteed in the NBA today. Thunder and its fans should really be appreciating every moment of this, but also looking to make the most of it. Nobody should be happy just to be there.
Yeah, and not only 6 different champions in the past 6 seasons, but also 12 different conference champions in those same 6 years. So there's been so much turnover and parity, which is unusual for the NBA. And so Thunder versus this era of parity and anti-dynasties, that's a compelling storyline, I think. And people have likened them to the mid-90s Bulls, which I think is kind of defensible in a couple of ways, because they are the 4th team to enter the finals with 80 combined regular season and postseason wins after the Warriors in 2016 and the Bulls in 96 and 97. And in terms of points per game margin, they've been the most dominant team other than the Bulls in 96. And then Shea gets compared to MJ sometimes too in terms of his style and his stats. So I see the parallels there. I would also think that if I were a Pacers fan, I would be feeling frustrated by the fact that we're already projecting the Thunder as a potential dynasty here and they haven't gotten through Indiana yet. It's just that they are sort of similar teams, except that the Thunder are just better at everything. And so I don't know whether that's advantage Pacers or advantage Thunder, because the Pacers kind of play a similar game in some respects, and maybe that blunts the Thunder's advantage. But then again, if they're playing the same sort of style of basketball and the Thunder are just deeper and better at it, then maybe that blunts the Pacers' advantage. I mean, the names, the Thunder, the Pacers, these are apt names for the way that these teams play, because they're both known for fast-paced play. They're both good at transition scoring, limiting turnovers, limiting opponents' transition scoring. But it's just hard to find something that the Pacers do better than the Thunder. My Ringer colleague, Michael Pina, made a valiant attempt and pointed out that the Pacers have been great at corner threes. That's been a familiar sight during these playoffs late in games, and the Thunder haven't been great at defending them. So maybe that's a vulnerability unless they just adjust. It's hard to find anything after a historically dominant season like this that the Thunder can't do.
I would agree that it feels like the Thunder's moment, but we're going to find out. This series starts at 8:30 Eastern Time on Thursday. It then proceeds mostly in an every other day format until it could wrap up as late as June 22nd. Ben, any last words?
Yeah, can I say something about that pace? Because it's kind of the opposite of how fast these teams play, how fast the schedule calls on them to play these games. It is pretty nuts how long the NBA and NHL Finals can potentially last. We're previewing them now, but we might not know the outcomes for a few weeks because the respective Game 7s in the NBA and the NHL would be on June 22nd, as you mentioned, and June 20th. So that's upwards of 3 weeks from the matchups being set to the possible final game. The most recent 7-game World Series took 8 days, which is speedy. So I'm all for allowing time to build some suspense and let players recover, especially with 2 teams that play at this pace. I want to see the best basketball, but 2 days off after each game in the same city just seems strange. You go back 10, 15 years, the 2010, 2013 finals were 7-game series, and they were played in a relatively brisk 2 weeks. So I don't know. It's kind of like the Rangers Diamondbacks World Series in 2023 in terms of the fretting about ratings, and we're less interested in that than the sports media watchers. And I think this could be a fun and exciting series, but boy, that is not fast. So you just have to adjust to the pace of that. Oh, and by the way, RIP to the Knicks. It felt like we should shout them out. They made a valiant run, and I will mourn them.
Wow, the NBA making what should be an exciting end of this season turn into a bit of a staccato happening with lots of pause breaks. We're not going to talk about that anymore in our bonus episode. That's not on theme at all.
Up next, the Stanley Cup. It is sequel time, and folks, we're not talking about Lilo and Stitch. This podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. You chose to hit play on this podcast today. Smart choice. Progressive loves to help people make smart choices. That's why they offer a tool called Auto Quote Explorer that allows you to compare your Progressive car insurance quote with rates from other companies. So you save time on the research and can enjoy savings when you choose the best rate for you. Give it a try after this episode at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Not available in all states or situations. Prices vary based on how you buy. As we progress through the season, every fan knows that big wins are hard to come by and tough losses are even harder to accept. But do you know what isn't hard to accept? Discover. Believe it or not, Discover is accepted at 99% of places that take credit cards nationwide. You heard that right. 99%. So make a good call for your wallet and get Discover. Based on the February 2024 Nielsen report. Learn more at discover.com/creditcard. Last year's Stanley Cup final was one for the books. The Florida Panthers took a 3-0 series lead against Connor McDavid, Leon Draisaitl, and the Oilers, threatening to sweep the best duo in hockey straight out of the series. But then the two future Hall of Famers fought back. The Oilers managed to pull even at 3 wins apiece, and then went back to Sunrise, Florida, where the Panthers shut them out in Game 7 and hoisted Lord Stanley and carried him all around the beach after doing that. Now these teams are both back, having won blowouts against their overmatched conference finals opponents. That was the Carolina Hurricanes having nothing against the Panthers, and the Dallas Stars really having nothing against the Oilers. Ben, people are asking 2 questions about this series. One, where is Sunrise, Florida? They ask it every year. We keep telling you. It's just across from a mall, about 40 miles north of Miami. The Panthers Arena is specifically. But the other question around this series is, in my opinion, this one. What is stronger? Is it the sheer force of Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl and the players that they lift up around them, and every year there are a few, or is it the seemingly endless reservoir of depth that the Panthers have both offensively and defensively? They're really rolling like 7 very good defensemen deep right now, and you only need 6. So what's stronger, Ben? The star power or the depth?
Yeah, it's a good question because in contrast to the NBA matchup, there's no clear favorite here. I think the Oilers are maybe slim favorites in this series, but it's a toss-up, and it was a close series last year when these two teams played, and they've had similar paths through these playoffs, really, and just sent their conference finals opponents home in 5 games apiece. I guess the Oilers are known as more offense first, and the Panthers are more defense first, though they've certainly had no trouble scoring this postseason. They've been putting the puck in the net even better than Edmonton has. So I think generally, to answer your question, I would go with the more well-rounded team over the less balanced roster that has the stronger single player. The thing is, though, that the Oilers aren't just the McDavid and Draisaitl show. I mean, that duo accounted for 30% of their goals during the regular season, but this is not a totally top-heavy stars and scrubs sort of roster. They have Evander Kane, they have Ryan Nugent-Hopkins. Those guys have helped. It hurts that Zach Hyman is out for this series, but they just got Matthias Ekholm back, so there is a supporting cast here. I think that Draisaitl was kind of hurt and hamstrung late in last year's playoffs, so even though they had that terrible 2, they weren't really at their full effectiveness, and now they're really going to have that, and the Panthers are going to have to contend with that. And also, McDavid started slow this postseason, especially as a scorer, but then really hit his stride against the Stars, which is probably bad news for the Panthers. So I guess I'd go with Edmonton, but it is far from clear here because the Panthers, 3 appearances in a row in the Stanley Cup Finals, and they may be better than last year's version too. And this has been an unusually strong playoffs for home teams, except when the Panthers are playing. They're 8-2 on the road. So this is kind of a clash of the Titans. I'm looking forward to it.
I think the personal subplots between these teams in this series could be very interesting. We've talked about the situation with the Panthers a few times in different lenses, but the Panthers are very much a kind of sandpapery type of team, personality-wise. Matthew Tkachuk is a great player, also sort of straddles that line, or at least has the well-earned reputation of straddling the line between chippy and kind of dirty. Brad Marchand, whom they acquired at the trade deadline from the Bruins, is maybe the definitive dirty but good player of his era. Sam Bennett, another really good forward on this team, hits players and whacks them with his stick in ways that are a little iffy. Last year, if I remember it correctly, the final was mostly about puck. There wasn't a ton of that, though there always is going to be some temper flaring in the Stanley Cup final. But, I just think this is going to be one that's really interesting to watch, because I think McDavid and Draisaitl aren't really interested in that and would rather that not be happening. And the Panthers, are designed to kind of piss you off and then also score a lot of goals against you because they're very good.
Yeah, I'm very interested in a couple of stats here. First of all, there's just this narrative with Connor McDavid looking to get his first. So, I read this in The Athletic, but also, they're not the only outlet to point this out. In 83, Wayne Gretzky went to his first Stanley Cup final, lost, and a year later, there was a rematch against the New York Islanders, and his team won in 08.
Sidney Crosby too.
In 08, the same thing with Sidney Crosby. So the fact that Connor McDavid gets this same opportunity that these other two greats, Gretzky and Crosby, had to get revenge on the team that beat him in his first Stanley Cup final, in his second Stanley Cup final. There's some narrative symmetry there that's really fun. And of course, last year, I remember the Panthers win so much, but I had forgotten that that was about to be a sweep before the Oilers came back and then pushed it to a Game 7 out of nowhere. That was this bizarre flow of a series. So then you think, well, maybe home ice is going to matter a lot. But as Ben, I think, was just talking about, the Panthers are so good on the road. So the Oilers actually have home ice in this series, but not only have the Panthers, do they have an .800 win percentage matched by only 17 other teams in the modern era, but in these playoffs, they've outscored opponents by 27 goals, which is the most in the modern era, which is just absolutely wild. 7 of their 8 wins have been by 3 or more goals. And this is when they're playing the best of the best. So, on the other hand, the Oilers have a 6-1 record at home. So something's got to give.
I will correct myself quickly. I said that the Game 7 last year was a shutout for for Florida over Edmonton. Actually, in the intro, I forgot this. This was 2-1.
2-1.
There was an Edmonton goal. But, Lindsay, the reason it got me thinking about that is that the other kind of advantage that the Panthers seem to have in this series, and we talk about goal differentials and just frankly how stingy they've been, is that Sergei Bobrovsky, who's 36 now, just kind of keeps doing it. He leads the league in goals saved above expectation in these playoffs. You would expect that at some point he would go the way that all goalies go, which is to at least be pretty up and down and then just kind of lose it. But yeah, Ben, it hasn't happened yet. And I do think he's an advantage over Stuart Skinner for Edmonton here.
Yeah, playoff goaltending is supposed to be random and unpredictable, but it seems like he's exempt from that, or at least he has been thus far. And there are a couple other storylines that intrigued me here. One is, it's an oldie but a goodie, but the Canadian Cup drought, I'm into it. I'm a sucker for this story as long as it lasts, and it has lasted for 30 seasons and counting now. So the North versus the Sun Belt battle is very intriguing to me. It's kind of like Rory winning the Masters, It's like the same storyline every time, but then when it finally happens, it's still super exciting, even though we were thinking about it for so long. And then the other one is that we're getting a rematch here, and rematches are rare just in general in the more random sports, hockey and baseball certainly, and to some extent football too. You just don't get a lot of championship rematches, but rematches are just generally rare these days. This is the first of the decade in any of the big 4 American men's sports. And of course, it's the first Stanley Cup rematch since Alex's Penguins and the Red Wings in 08 and 09, which was itself the first in the NHL since the Oilers and Islanders in 83 and 84. So that doesn't happen often in hockey to begin with, but I think it happens less and less these days across sports. because you have more teams and you have more playoff rounds and you have more parity and fewer dynasties, as we were just discussing in our basketball segment, which I think is good on the whole. I'm in favor of spreading the wealth around and letting more fan bases get their moment in the sun. But there is something to the rematch and to the storylines that build up when you have the same players, and there's the baggage and there's the playoff history and all of those matchups. That's fun. And we just don't see it that often, which again makes the Panthers just being a staple of the Stanley Cup Finals at this point, I think all the more impressive when you adjust for their era.
I do think the politics add a little juice to this. And I wouldn't normally think that, but we just saw it in the Four Nations.
Yeah.
Like that clearly was part of it. This is not a national sporting competition, and I don't know that you'll notice this like in the arena other than who knows, maybe there will be a little bit of booing of the national anthem just because it's the Stanley Cup. Although I don't think that's been particularly loud over the course of the Oilers playoff run. But this one is an entire country against the Florida Panthers, I think. I was in Vancouver a little bit more than a week ago, and having a completely not fabricated, but in fact real conversation with two nice people who live in suburban Vancouver. And they were discussing that we were watching them play game 2, the Oilers against the Stars. And they were like, yeah, well, we gotta root for the Oilers. Those are not two teams that naturally root for one another's success. But I do feel like the Canadian drought, in light of trade wars, annexation threats, etc., seems like it's, a little extra something on your hockey sandwich.
Well, the population of Canada does outnumber the population of Florida, though probably by less than you'd think.
It could be close. Up next, NFL owners are gearing up for war, or at least for making some stern telephone calls about Donald Trump and Mike Johnson maybe messing with a nice tax perk that team owners have enjoyed. This episode is sponsored by the San Diego State University Sports MBA program. SDSU's Sports MBA is a full-time, in-person graduate program that trains students for sports business roles with team front offices, agencies, venues, brands, and more. The program's curriculum includes all of the quantitative coursework of a typical MBA, but adds a sports focus with themes familiar to regular hang-up listeners, such as the growth of women's sports, labor relations, athletes' rights, and social responsibility. SDSU Sports MBA students even spend a week studying abroad in the Dominican Republic to learn about the many ways Major League Baseball's presence impacts the country. Throughout their studies, students serve as interns, consultants, and part-time employees with sports organizations across Southern California, including the San Diego Padres. I actually just went to that ballpark over the weekend, by the way. Great stadium. Applications are currently being accepted through July 1st for an August 2025 start. Visit sdsu.edu/hangup to learn more and apply. That's sdsu.edu/hangup.
This podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever find yourself playing the budgeting game, shifting a little money here, a little there, just hoping it all works out? Well, with the Name Your Price tool from Progressive, you can be a better budgeter and potentially lower your insurance bill, too. You tell Progressive what you want to pay for car insurance, and they'll help you find options within your budget. Try it today at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law. Not available in all states.
This episode is sponsored by the San Diego State University Sports MBA program. SDSU's Sports MBA is a full-time, in-person graduate program that trains students for sports business roles with team front offices, agencies, venues, brands, and more. The program's curriculum includes all of the quantitative coursework of a typical MBA, but adds a sports focus with themes familiar to regular hang-up listeners, such as the growth of women's sports, labor relations, athletes' rights, and social responsibility. SDSU Sports MBA students even spend a week studying abroad in the Dominican Republic to learn about the many ways Major League Baseball's presence impacts the country. Throughout their studies, students serve as interns, consultants, and part-time employees with sports organizations across Southern California, including the San Diego Padres. Applications are currently being accepted through July 1st for an August 2025 start. Visit sdsu.edu/hangup to learn more and apply. That's sdsu.edu/hangup. For several decades, sports team owners in the United States have had a great little advantage when they have filed their taxes at the end of the year, which has been the ability to write off the intangible assets they are called. Things like player contracts and a whole list of other goodies that they have executed in the course of operating the day-to-day business of a sports team. And this has often worked out to many, many millions of dollars in savings when sports team owners have filed their taxes. That advantage is now under significant threat, tucked away neatly in the big, beautiful bill that Donald Trump and House Republicans have been working on over the past few weeks is a clause that would say that only half of those assets would be able to be written off by American sports teams owners. And they're pretty concerned about this, as you might imagine. Ken Belson has covered the business of sports, particularly the NFL, for 15 years at the New York Times. He's also the author of a forthcoming book that I very much look forward to reading when it comes out. That's Every Day is Sunday, How Jerry Jones, Robert Kraft, and Roger Goodell Turned the NFL into a Cultural and Economic Juggernaut. That's coming out in October. Ken, you've reported for the Times on this potential looming change to the way taxes are done for sports team owners. Safe to say they're not very happy about it.
No, the president sort of hinted at it a couple of months ago, obliquely, and sure enough, in that gigantic bill that passed the House, is a clause that says the deduction will be cut in half. And so the owners who met in third week of May in Minneapolis were actually briefed on the matter and encouraged to contact their senators in their home state so that when the Senate crafts its own bill, it doesn't include this provision. And hopefully they, lean on the senators to get the House to strip it out of their version of the bill.
Can I ask, this certainly seems awfully specific, and I know this is something that you've written about, in that it connects to a particular group of people who have not in the past let Donald Trump into their club. I don't know many Republican voters or rank and file who are really thinking a lot about the tax deductions that are so specific to sports team owners. Is the idea here that this did come from just the personal backstory between the president and the NFL?
Well, the White House says absolutely not. They're just looking for new sources of revenue. In their interpretation, this is about closing a loophole for owners that essentially comes at the expense of consumers, of the fans who are paying increasingly high prices for tickets and parking and beer and other things. I just came from a ball game, so I know I dropped a lot of money there too. So there's some of that. I guess that's a fair interpretation. But when you look at the dollar amount, it isn't a huge amount, and it's certainly not going to cover anywhere near enough of the tax breaks they're trying to fund. So it's hard to deny there isn't a long issue between Donald Trump and particularly the NFL. He's tried numerous times to buy teams going back to the early 1980s, the Baltimore Colts when they were there, the New England Patriots, most recently the Buffalo Bills. And so he's been denied entry into this exclusive club. Part of that stems from the fact that he owned the New Jersey Generals in the 1980s and spearheaded an effort to sue the NFL for antitrust violations or he claimed that the NFL was colluding with the networks to keep him out of the fall season. And he had ultimately won that, but he literally won $1 in damages, tripled to $3. So he essentially bankrupted both his team and the league in winning this sort of Pyrrhic victory. And so there's been longstanding bad blood between the league and Donald Trump. Having said all that, there are owners he's friendly with, Jerry Jones, Robert Kraft. He was a guest in Robert Kraft's suite for many years. But that's one thing to be friends with him, another to do business. And, your listeners can decide whether Donald Trump can be vindictive and try and penalize people he doesn't like. This is one interpretation of the provision in the tax code.
Yeah, because for those who haven't followed the legislation as a whole, it's not as if tightening the screws on the wealthy is really the goal here, right? And so that's why this specific measure does seem somewhat punitive, or at least specifically crafted. It's somewhat out of step with the larger goals here here of preserving the earlier tax breaks.
Yeah, and the dollar amount that the taxation office expects to gain from this, or to bring in from this, is under $1 billion over 10 years. That's not a ton of money when you're trying to pass billions and even trillions of dollars in tax cuts elsewhere. And that's why some of the team presidents and executives that I spoke to felt like this was punitive and specifically targeting the NFL, although other leagues will suffer from this as well, or suffer is a loaded word, will be affected by it.
Usually when I think about all the tax breaks that these billionaire owners get, you think about like the stadiums and things like that. I actually... And I'm a little embarrassed that I was not aware at how much they could write off of this provision. When I was reading about it, it seemed like the provision was originally written so that things that depreciated in value could be written off. But how did, in the first place, these billionaire owners of these sports teams start finding this loophole and kind of using it in this way? Has this always been the case?
Well, this actually goes back to the 1940s. An owner named Bill Veeck, who owned Cleveland and then the Chicago White Sox, he actually convinced the IRS that his player payroll was a depreciating asset, because, well, for many years it was a bad team. He had bad teams, and there is a certain logic to it. It is an asset. You don't think of a baseball team the way you would a factory. So the stadium, of course, is probably the most tangible asset. But in the case of NFL teams, certainly 80% of their assets are intangible. And there is real value to it. So there is an inner logic to it. The issue here is that, in fact, teams' intangible assets are not depreciating. It's certainly in the NFL's case. Media rights are only going up. Player payroll is going up also. Sponsorship money is going up. So the size of the tax breaks is actually getting larger because the assets are appreciating in value. And so I think the NFL and most of the leagues are concerned because this loophole that allows owners to recoup a lot of their purchase price of these teams could shrink in size, and that could cool the market for teams that come up for sale in the future.
Yeah, Ken, I find two things about the exemption to be a little bit odd, or about the current writing of the code. And one is just what you say, which is that, when you think about the way that NFL contracts are thought of, especially now, they are not only appreciating assets, but they can be the most appreciating assets. I mean, Patrick Mahomes signs a contract with the Chiefs a couple of years ago that at the time is the most money a football player has ever been given. This thing has become exponentially more valuable over the years since it's been signed because the salary cap goes up, and now you have the best quarterback in the league making, pretty good, but not even necessarily top of the market quarterback money. And number two is that my employer gets to write off my wages, but obviously not as an asset, just as an expense. And so it does feel just sort of so ridiculous to me that this could even exist. And I think the question that I would have for you is, how did this even survive as long as it did? Mm-hmm. Is this just a story of political money and power and their intersection, or is there something more tricky at play here? Because it just seems so odd.
Well, two things. One is to Lindsay's point, and I pointed to Bill Veeck back in the 40s, but really the current provision started in a massive bill that was passed in 2004 by George Bush when he was president, and he was a team owner. So it's clear he thought like team owners, and it's unclear whether he pushed for it individually, but certainly he understood where the owners were coming from. And the second thing is that politicians, in my experience, both in Congress, in city halls that I've met, they're deferential to very few other industries the way they are to sports. And I remember being at a Capitol Hill hearing, and every member on both sides of the aisle who asked a question of Roger Goodell and the other speakers who were brought in would start by saying how much they love their hometown team, which is sort of a weird way to sort of grill somebody, is to start out by saying, well, actually, I'm a really big Chiefs fan, but by the way, I have to ask you this question. And I've seen that in other settings. And so I think sports owners get kind of a pass because it's very popular with voters, right? You don't want to be the mayor who loses a team that moves to another city, the governor, so forth. And to Lindsay's point, one of the big controversies, I guess, in sports is the subsidizing of stadiums at taxpayer expense. So, yeah, I just think sports is treated differently than almost every other industry in America.
I'm a fan of Bill Veeck and his books. Veeck is in Rec and A Hustler's Handbook. It's a little more charming to read about his in-game promotions and moving outfield fences than figuring out how to get a lower tax bill. But I guess it's part and parcel with his other stunts. You're not on Capitol Hill counting votes, I know, but what would you say is the likelihood of this actually surviving the Senate version of this bill? Because I would never bet against billionaires and their collective lobbying power when it comes to preserving a loophole like this.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how to assess the odds other than to say that you do have a smaller group of only 100 senators. And, you've got 32 NFL teams, you got 30 MLB teams, you got hockey and basketball. So you have a lot of very wealthy people making calls to probably, you only need about, say, 5 or 10 influential senators to tilt it one way or the other. And it's such a relatively small part of the overall bill. I mean, you've got issues about the future of Medicaid and Medicare, and these are gigantic issues. And this is one thing that I think could probably be stripped out without anybody really noticing, and it could survive another day. And again, the other thing is, do you want to cross or to be accused of not supporting a hometown team? I realize that's sort of an awkward thing when you're talking about supporting a billionaire who may not even live in your hometown or the team's hometown. But I don't think it's a large enough thing of consequence that, it would, if it was missing, anybody would notice.
I just think of it as almost like a PR win for Trump that it's in there in the first place, because as we said, the bill is very generous to the wealthy and in the aggregate, and very hard on those who are not wealthy. And yet this allows him to, in the first couple of sentences describing the bill, say, like, we're going after billionaires and, we're for the working man. But let's say this does go through. It's hard to imagine the NBA and NFL teams. There's such a scarcity, as we've mentioned, of those teams that even if this benefit goes away, the status of owning one of those teams still remains. But what about for the smaller teams? I'm someone who covers women's sports primarily, and we are seeing those valuations skyrocket, but there's still minuscule compared to $6.1 billion that we just saw for the Celtics. What impact do you think it would have on smaller sports leagues?
Yeah, it's a great question. There's no doubt NFL and Major League Baseball teams are always going to be in demand. They have the largest TV revenue, NBA as well. They don't really change hands very often. There's only sort of one or two that come up every few years. So there's not a lot to, if a billionaire wants to own a big team, he or she can find one. But you're right, the smaller leagues are perhaps more at risk. And there is a feeding frenzy going on right now with women's hockey. There are 3 volleyball leagues. There's track and field leagues popping up. Some of this is being driven by relatively cheap interest rates that have allowed to fund it. But a lot of it is, let's roll the dice on a $50 or $100 million investment, because they'll make it back in depreciating the asset over time. Well, if some of that goes away, or at least half of it goes away, that could cool the market in general. And that could hurt the existing or incumbent owners, because their valuations are based on the future price of teams or the teams bought in the future. So nobody's going to cry for the owners in this case, in any case. But if it cuts off funding to emerging leagues, that could be a problem. And by the way, we're often dealing with the same pool of owners. There are owners who own multiple franchises. They might own a football team and a soccer team and the women's soccer team in a given city. Stan Kroenke owns hockey, basketball, football, soccer in Britain, and so forth. So we're often talking about the same billionaires, and they might say, well, on the margins, I don't want to own a piece in a smaller league.
If they can't write it off anymore, right? Yeah.
Ken, it strikes me that there are two maybe competing considerations here if you're the NFL. As you've covered at some length in the Times, NFL owners, NFL financial minds have been trying to finagle ways for a few years to somewhat liberalize ownership rules so that pieces of teams can trade hands and that the value of these teams does not get to a point where they literally can't change hands, because then what's the point? But also on the other side, not to put you on the spot to say this as you noted, but the potential, the slight chance of maybe some vindictiveness and some desire not to cross the president. And I think we just saw this with Pete Rose being removed from the permanently ineligible list in Major League Baseball. This is a guy who's the most powerful person in the world who you don't really seem to want to be fighting if you can avoid it. How do you see that interplay unfolding here in terms of how hard the NFL tries to fight this? I mean, you mentioned making some phone calls, but on the one hand, this would seem to, make it a little bit less attractive to own NFL teams, though I agree people always want to. But you also probably don't want to be fighting the White House, I would imagine. Seems like a pickle.
Yeah, the NFL in particular is very sensitive to this for some of the reasons we were chatting about. And, they're generally risk averse. They went through, a year plus of dispute over kneeling and the national anthem, almost 2 years. And so the NFL doesn't want to step into a landmine. You and your listeners probably noticed Roger Goodell visited the Oval Office to announce that the 2027 NFL draft will be in Washington. Wink, wink, Mr. President. You might preside over it in some way or call out a draft pick or something like that. They're very savvy. And Roger Goodell in particular, the son of a senator, knows kind of how to read the tea leaves. And of course, he's doing this on behalf of the owners, but he's pretty shrewd at this, and also somewhat unassociated, but probably still on the theme that you're talking about. Major League Baseball, and NFL have been maybe easing off of some of their diversity and inclusion language. The NFL just delayed a program for emerging coaches of color, and they canceled the meeting they were going to have last month and said they were going to reboot it next year. The league denied it had anything to do with the president or any of his initiatives, but the timing was curious.
While this is hanging over owners' heads, would you expect this to chill any franchise changes of ownership, or would you expect it to potentially accelerate it because this applies only to future owners? And thus, if you wanted to sell, then maybe you would want to get that over with as quickly as you could before this passes. The Minnesota Twins, for instance, are up for sale right now. Maybe you want to ram this through before it could apply to a new owner. Then again, I guess if you think that you can't scramble in time to actually get a sale done before this was potentially passed, then you might be incentivized to hold on.
Yeah, it's a good question, Ben. And while you and I can sell our house in probably 2 months, teams and the vetting processes that the leagues go through take much longer. And then there's a question of whether a team sale might be announced before the tax break takes effect, but could be grandfathered in. These are questions that are kind of hard to fully understand now because the legislation's pretty narrow, not fully written out. And so I don't think that's a likelihood, at least for a big market team. Now, it may be, to Lindsay's point, maybe a women's soccer team, some expansion franchises in the new leagues. There might be a rush to buy, but I don't think the numbers are large enough to justify suddenly plunking down $50 million. The tax break isn't of a huge consequence at that point. It's really when you get into the 9 and even 10-figure purchases that the tax break makes a big, big difference.
Ken Belson, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate reading your coverage in the New York Times, and we're looking forward to the book. It comes out in October, on the 14th of that month in particular. It's called Every Day is Sunday, How Jerry Jones, Robert Kraft, and Roger Goodell Turned the NFL into a Cultural and Economic Juggernaut. Very relevant to what we're just talking about here on this episode. Ken, thanks a lot.
Thanks for having me on.
That's all for this episode. We've also got a special bonus show that's in the podcast feeds right now for our treasured Slate Plus subscribers. It's about Fouling Up 3, the scourge of the basketball world. To hear that, you can subscribe to Slate Plus on Apple Podcasts by clicking Try Free at the top of our show page, or visit slate.com/hangup plus to get access wherever you listen. The episode is available right now, and we look forward to seeing you over there. Our show notes are at slate.com/hangup, and you can email us at hangup@slate.com. And don't forget to follow the show and rate and review us on Apple Podcasts. Our producer is Kevin Bendis. For Ben Lindbergh and Lindsay Gibbs, I'm Alex Kirshner. Remember Zelma Beatty, and thanks for listening.